The day my company went bankrupt, no one knew I had secretly built a new $100 billion empire. My father screamed, "You are a failure." My wife spat in my face and ran off with her lover. I was about to speak, and what came next broke them. The news broke at exactly 9:00 a.m. The headline flashed across every major financial news outlet. Apex Solutions files Chapter 11. Tech darling Nicholas crashes out. My public failure was complete, precisely on schedule. I sat in my downtown apartment. The cool leather of my chair, a stark contrast to the boiling chaos outside. I felt not panic, but a deep, quiet relief. The control I had fought so hard to maintain had finally dissolved, just as planned. This public collapse was the final piece of the lock I needed to break free. I had barely hung up from the final, sterile call with my legal team when the front door burst open. The confrontation was immediate, a scene I had rehearsed in my head for 6 years. Elias, my father, stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of purple, red fury. He was defined by success, and my failure was, to him, a personal stain. "You idiot," Elias hissed, advancing into the living room. "Look at this mess. Look at what you have done to the family name. The name I spent 50 years building." He gripped his expensive leather briefcase, so hard his knuckles were white. "You had every advantage, Nicholas. Every last dollar in connection, and you squandered it all on some juvenile fantasy." Victoria, my wife, followed him in. Her movements dramatic and calculated. She was dressed impeccably, ready for a fight. Or perhaps, ready to make an exit. She had married the future CEO of a thriving public company, not the disgraced founder of a bankrupt shell. She viewed my financial ruin as a personal affront to her status. "I cannot believe I wasted 3 years of my life on you," Victoria declared, her voice pitched high for maximum effect. She had the air of someone who should be crying, but her eyes were cold, assessing the value of her next move. "I am leaving. Do not try to call me. I already arranged everything with James." James was the partner at the law firm that had once handled Apex's mergers. The lack of subtlety was stunning, yet entirely predictable. Elias's condemnation landed like a physical blow precisely because it was nothing new. "You are a failure, Nicholas. A total, utter, public failure. You do not belong here. Get out of my sight. You are no longer my son." He was performing his ultimate rejection, hoping to inspire some plea, some sign of repentance, some fight for his approval. I stood silently, my spine rigid. I made no move to defend myself or Apex Solutions. I simply watched the truth of their character unfold before me. Victoria stepped closer, her expression turning from theatrical rage to genuine disgust. She raised her hand and, with a swift, cold movement, she spat directly on my face. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated contempt. She then turned sharply and walked out, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble floor. Elias, momentarily stunned by Victoria's raw cruelty, quickly regained his composure and pointed toward the door. "Go. Now." He felt vindicated. His long-held judgment of me had finally been proven right. I felt the spit cool on my skin, but I remained utterly still. I absorbed their every word, every calculated betrayal. This was the moment I had anticipated, the required sacrifice. The truth I had always known, that their acceptance was conditional, tied entirely to my ability to maintain an illusion, was now cemented in a memory too sharp to ever ignore. My family's toxic judgment was now undeniable, confirming that my desperate need for secrecy and the construction of my $100 billion fortress had been necessary for my survival. I suppressed the smallest hint of a smile. Their storm of judgment was merely the prelude to my final, defining act of liberation. The public conflict was over. The private reckoning had just begun. They saw a man broken by loss. But what they did not know was that the loss itself was the final piece of the lock I needed to break free. I walked out of the apartment, leaving the sound of my father's heavy, judgmental breathing behind me, and drove directly to the industrial park on the city's far south side. This part of the city was anonymous, filled with gray, windowless buildings designed for function, not status. It was the perfect cloak. I walked past a faded sign for a small import-export firm and used a specific numeric code on an unmarked steel door. Inside, the world shifted. I stepped into the clandestine headquarters of Phoenix Corporation. It was vast, sleek, and humming with the silent energy of thousands of networked servers and hundreds of brilliant minds working globally. Apex Solutions had been a house of cards, built to satisfy Elias's vanity. Phoenix, however, was the real engine, my true creation. The story of Phoenix started 7 years ago, right after a harsh argument where Elias had publicly shamed me over a small, failed college investment. That moment taught me that my family would only love the version of me they could control. So, I built a secret, separate structure. Apex was the highly visible target, a successful enough company to keep the family happy and distracted, yet fundamentally designed with structural weaknesses that made its collapse inevitable and controllable. Phoenix was the escape valve, the passion project, the real innovation. Marcus was waiting for me in the executive lounge, a glass office overlooking the main operations floor. He was my chief operating officer, 48 years old, calm, and pragmatic. He was the only person on earth who knew the full, insane scope of my double game. He looked up, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "It's done then," he said, pushing a tablet across the polished mahogany table. "Apex is officially dead." I nodded, the action feeling liberating. Clean. Quick. And exactly when they expected it. Marcus opened a secure document on the tablet. "Good. Because we, meanwhile, are not dead." In the last 48 hours alone, Phoenix secured the Singapore deal, finalized the acquisition of Omni Data, and our market cap has settled. He paused, leaning forward. "Nicholas, Phoenix Corporation is valued at $100 billion. Undisclosed, of course, but real." The number was staggering, yet expected. It was the sum total of every late night, every planned misdirection, and every risk I had taken. It was the material proof of my independent worth. I looked at Marcus. "This was the price for my freedom, Marcus. Apex's failure gave me an undeniable reason to walk away. It separated the wheat from the chaff, or in my case, the vultures from the architect. I understand the necessity of the shield," Marcus said, his voice low. "But you have spent 7 years planning a public humiliation and a quiet escape. You now have the ultimate fortress, but you are still hiding inside it." His words landed with weight because they were true. I had planned the structural freedom, but I had not planned the emotional transition. The years of isolation and secrecy had been a necessary burden. But now the burden was threatening to become the new normal. My drive to prove my self-worth had morphed into an addiction to control. "Victoria's lawyer has already sent a veiled threat. By the way," Marcus continued, shifting the subject back to the immediate threat. "They are sniffing around Apex's assets, hinting at claims against personal property. It's exactly the greed we predicted." "Good," I said, picking up a pen and circling a few key figures on the financial report. Let them chase the ghost of a failed company. It confirms their motives perfectly. We will make sure the paper trail shows Apex was a liability, not an asset. I leaned back, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the past 24 hours. My greatest creation, Phoenix, was untouchable, a towering symbol of success. Yet, the emotional wound inflicted by Elias still throbbed. I had protected the empire, but not the man inside it. "We are free to move now, Nicholas," Marcus stated, watching me closely. "You can launch Phoenix publicly tomorrow and retire Apex's debt with a fraction of the profits. You have won the financial war. But you still haven't addressed the root of the fight." He was right. The final, essential move was not to sell Phoenix or expand its territory. It was to confront the source of my trauma, Elias. I had built $100 billion wall, but now I had to decide when and how to tear it down. And the thought brought a sudden, cold wave of dread. I knew the moment I faced Elias again, armed with the truth. The battle would shift from finance to raw emotion, and that was the one arena I had spent my life avoiding. Slept. I looked down at the $100 billion valuation, knowing it was meaningless until I could use it to achieve the closure. I walked away from the wreckage of my old life, retreating to the one place where the air felt clean, the anonymous headquarters of Phoenix Corporation. In the weeks following the bankruptcy of Apex Solutions, I made the HQ my sanctuary, spending every waking hour in the control room. That was, effectively, the epicenter of my new world. The deep anonymity of Phoenix was the most precious commodity I possessed. The building's location was restricted, its security protocols layered, and my identity as its founder was buried beneath 3 separate holding companies and a layer of intentional obfuscation. Here, I was Nicholas, the visionary, the architect of a disruptive technological force. I spent my days engrossed in algorithms, development cycles, and strategic global partnerships. I worked with a furious, almost desperate intensity, focusing on growth as a form of meditation. If I kept my mind tethered to the complexities of a $100 billion empire, I did not have to dwell on the stinging silence left by my father and the cruel rejection of my ex-wife. I felt an immense, satisfying sense of control. Unlike Apex, which I had built to be fragile and flashy, Phoenix was robust and true. It represented my genuine talent, free from Aes's suffocating expectations. I lived in a high-security penthouse suite attached to the building, rarely leaving the compound. My entire world was now encapsulated in this controlled, successful environment. Marcus, however, was not content with this quiet retreat. He watched me with the steady, unnerving intensity of a man who saw past the balance sheet and into the emotional ledger. One late evening, I found him leaning against the glass wall of the executive lounge, watching the rain streak down the windows. "Nicholas, Phoenix will run itself without you managing the supply chain metrics," he said, his voice flat. Slept. I didn't look up from the tablet displaying a quarterly revenue projection. "Risk management is never complete, Marcus. We need to stay 2 steps ahead." "You are 200 steps ahead," he countered, walking closer. "You built this fortress so you could stop running, but you are still avoiding the necessary emotional confrontation. You've replaced your old need for your father's approval with a need for absolute isolation. You are hiding behind a $100 billion fortress." His words were sharp, and they pierced the protective bubble I had built. The truth was, every time I thought about facing Elias, about dropping the bomb of Phoenix's true existence, a primal fear gripped me. It wasn't fear of physical violence or even financial reprisal. It was the fear of being truly, emotionally seen, and then rejected once more. The public failure had been painful, but controlled. The final confrontation would be pure, unpredictable emotion, the one arena I had never mastered. The outside world continued to nibble at the edges of my sanctuary. A few days later, a thick, formal letter arrived via courier from Victoria's lawyer, listing her extravagant financial demands. She claimed she had been misled about the true financial health of Apex Solutions and was seeking a massive settlement, attempting to claim assets that were thankfully protected by my careful pre-planning. The letter was a transparent attempt at intimidation and resource extraction. It was a predictable, greedy extension of the contempt she had shown when she spat on me. She truly believed I was a bankrupt failure, and she was simply trying to salvage the last few million from the wreckage. Her lawyer's wording, however, was aggressive, hinting at character assassination if I didn't comply. It only reaffirmed my decision to leave her and Elias behind. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the secure shredder. She is a predictable variable, I told Marcus, who was reviewing the document with detached amusement. Let the legal team handle the inevitable denial. The goal isn't to negotiate, it's to confirm her greed. Marcus folded his arms. That's fine for Victoria. But we need to talk about Elias. He is quiet. Too quiet. He is either plotting his own move to save face, or he is suffering. Either way, you deserve to close that door, not just hide behind it. I've closed it, I insisted, turning my attention back to the screen. I am Disowned. They have what they wanted, a failure they can point to. I have my real success. That is closure enough. No, Marcus said firmly. Closure is when you can stand in front of him, tell him the truth, and walk away without needing his response to validate your choices. You planned the ultimate humiliation for him, Nicholas. The fact that you are too afraid to deliver the punchline shows he still has control over you. You are hiding behind the 99% chance of success, unwilling to risk the 1% chance of being hurt again. His words stung with uncomfortable accuracy. My focus on Phoenix's meticulous growth was, I realized, a form of procrastination. Every time I reached for the phone to call Elias, to finally tell him about the $100 billion, I saw his furious, judgmental face from that college argument years ago, the one that taught me success was conditional. I was trapped in a self-imposed loop, using my victory as a shield against true self-acceptance. Avoidance was beginning to feel like profound cowardice. The failure of Apex was calculated. Yes, I admitted, my voice dropping. But the humiliation was real. The shame was the necessary collateral damage. If I confront him now, it has to be definitive. It has to be an ending, not another beginning. It will be definitive only if you own the victory, not just the loss, Marcus countered. He reached across the table and placed his hand flat on the financial report, covering the stunning net worth number. The money is meaningless for this fight. You need a counter-attack built from proof of his hypocrisy, not just your success. Marcus was forcing me to look beyond the financial victory and acknowledge the deep, painful wound Elias had inflicted. I knew the next step couldn't be a cold email or a legal threat. It had to be a public, total inversion of the power dynamic. I had to face him in a place where he least expected it, where my success would not just be an announcement, but an undeniable, public fact. I stared at the dark reflection of my own face in the glass wall, a face that looked tired but was suddenly hardening with resolve. The emotional confrontation was inevitable. I just needed the right stage to deliver the final, shattering blow. I knew if I was going to finish this, I could not just walk in with money. I needed a counter-attack built from proof, not rage. Marcus's challenge, that my continued evasion meant Elias still held control, had been the cold water I needed. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. I converted the old pain into strategic energy. I spent the next week meticulously preparing the evidence package. This was not about proving my wealth to a judge. It was about proving the integrity of Phoenix Corporation to the world. And more importantly, proving the hypocrisy of Elias to himself. I worked with the legal team to create ironclad documentation that detailed the total separation of Phoenix Corp. from Apex Solutions years before the bankruptcy. The paper trail needed to be clean, irrefutable, and utterly devastating to any claim Victoria or Elias might attempt to make against my actual wealth. The goal was simple: complete immunity for my true empire and total exposure for their motives. I printed secure copies of all the asset allocation agreements, corporate registrations filed under shell corporations, slept, and the precise timelines that proved Phoenix was operational and valued at tens of billions before Apex ever began its final, controlled descent. It was a masterpiece of legal planning, designed to make my failure seem accidental, while making my success seem entirely inevitable. Slept, while auditing old family financial files to ensure no residual Apex liability could be linked to Phoenix, I stumbled across something far more useful than balance sheets. I found documents detailing Elias's own business history, specifically a series of aggressive, highly unethical takeovers from 2 decades prior. These weren't illegal, but they were morally reprehensible, involving the deliberate ruin of a competitor for minimal gain, hidden behind complex legal maneuvering. The file confirmed the family's deep moral rot was not recent, it was generational. Elias had built his career on the same manipulative foundation he was now condemning me for failing to uphold. The hypocrisy was astonishing, yet tragically familiar. I added copies of these damning documents to the file. This was the proof Marcus spoke of, that Elias's condemnation of my failure was rooted not in ethics, but in the shame of not controlling my public narrative. Midweek, my secure phone flashed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Victoria. "Nicholas, thank God," she said, her voice shaky and low, stripped of its theatrical edge. "I am sorry about the bankruptcy. Truly. It's just that things have been rough with James." I remained silent, letting the emptiness of the line draw out her performance. He left," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "He found someone else who was already wealthy. He said my old money expectations were too much. I have almost nothing, Nick. Can we please talk? Maybe we can fix this. I miss you." The attempted manipulation was staggering. She was no longer looking for money in the divorce. She was looking for a lifeline from the husband she had publicly shamed and discarded. "Victoria," I finally said, my voice flat, "I received your lawyer's letter. I think your demands speak louder than your words." Her pretense of remorse evaporated instantly. "You cannot be serious! After everything, you are going to leave me with nothing. You have a responsibility to me, Nick. You promised me a life." "I promised you a life built on honesty, Victoria," I corrected her quietly. "You chose James and a lie. You chose contempt over commitment. The truth is, slept. You simply threw away a $100 billion future for a few quick thousand that never materialized. And now you are facing the consequences of your choices." I hung up before she could respond. The finality of the action was cleansing. Her desperation was exactly what I needed to see to eliminate any residual doubt about my path forward. With the legal counter, documentation, and the family hypocrisy file complete, I had every necessary weapon. The final, critical piece was the stage. I needed to ensure that when I delivered the truth, it couldn't be whispered away or denied. It had to be a public, seismic event that would permanently alter their standing in the only court they respected, society. I learned from Marcus that Elias was scheduled to attend the annual Global Tech Innovators Gala in 3 weeks. It was a high-profile, exclusive event where Elias frequently held court, trading on his reputation as a financial titan and my father. He would be there expecting praise and perhaps offering commiseration for his poor, failed son. Phoenix Corp, through one of its subsidiary shell companies, was a major, yet unannounced, sponsor of the gala. The timing was perfect. "That's where we do it," I told Marcus, closing the evidence folder with a sharp snap. "I will attend the gala. Not as Nicholas, the disgraced founder of Apex, but as a phantom, an honored guest. I will walk into his fortress of status and drop the $100 billion truth directly onto his most protected stage." Marcus leaned across the table, his expression grave. "He will not handle this gracefully, Nicholas. You know him. He will try to destroy you. Are you ready for that final battle?" I tapped the folder. "I am ready. I have spent my entire adult life preparing for the day I no longer need his approval. The confrontation is set. It's time I collected the only reward that matters, my autonomy." I felt a cold, sharp certainty, a total lack of fear. I was done hiding. The gala was in 3 weeks. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. The noise and the lights of the gala felt like a stage designed for an execution. Only this time, I was not the victim. 3 weeks had passed since I set the confrontation, and the waiting had been the hardest part. Now, standing just inside the massive, gilded ballroom of the Grand Regent Hotel, I felt a calm that bordered on numbness. The Global Tech Innovators Gala was exactly the kind of event Elias adored, a dazzling performance of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast sharp, brilliant light over hundreds of figures in black ties and designer gowns, reflecting off polished marble floors. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint, sweet smell of forced confidence. I was here, but not as Nicholas, the disgraced founder of Apex. Tonight, I was merely a phantom, an honored guest of a subsidiary sponsor. I was escorted in by a liaison from Phoenix Corp's public relations team, an elegant, efficient woman who had no idea who I actually was. As we moved through the throng, I scanned the room. My heart, against my rigid control, gave a small, nervous kick when I spotted them near the main podium, already holding court. Elias looked magnificent, radiating the cold, assured power of a man who believed his reputation was untouchable. He stood slightly taller than the others, his posture that of a judge receiving praise. Victoria was beside him, draped in a shimmering emerald gown, her face artfully composed. She had clearly thrown her last resources into maintaining the illusion of wealth, desperately trying to prove that even in bankruptcy, I had somehow provided for her. They were laughing with a group of investment bankers, performing the predictable act of the family, who had survived a minor public setback with dignity. I could practically hear Elias telling the story of my misguided vision and his patience, while his son self-destructed. I moved closer, weaving through the crowd. Elias caught my eye first, his expression quickly running through several stages of confusion before settling on bewildered hostility. He hadn't expected me to be here. A disgraced founder attending a celebratory gala was simply bad etiquette, a desperate cry for attention. Victoria took longer. She was mid-sentence, leaning into a conversation with a hedge fund manager, when her gaze swept past me. She paused mid-word, her mouth hanging slightly open. The shock was palpable. Her carefully constructed smile shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, cold panic. She recovered quickly, forcing her attention back to the manager. But the damage was done. They recognized the failure, but they couldn't place the confidence. The moment came when the master of ceremonies, after several booming introductions, gestured toward me. "And now, please welcome Mr. Nicholas Hale, an unannounced guest of our core sponsor, a true visionary." I advanced toward the podium, extending my hand to the host. Elias watched me, his forehead furrowed. The applause for my arrival was respectful, but Elias's glare was anything but. I had been introduced as Nicholas Hale, the name on the official Phoenix registration documents that had been filtered through a dozen shell companies. They couldn't connect the name to the disgraced founder of Apex Solutions. I made small talk with the host, then felt a heavy hand clap down on my shoulder. Elias had broken away from his group and moved to stand directly beside me, his attempt at seizing control immediate. "Nicholas," he said, his voice dropping to a forced, intimate tone that was purely for the benefit of the surrounding crowd. "I didn't expect to see you here. It takes real courage, or maybe a lack of sense, to show your face after what happened with Apex. A true shame." He leaned in, his smile tight, attempting to project the image of a concerned but disappointed father. He was already trying to reclaim the narrative, positioning me as the repentant son who had crawled back to the family fold. "I'm surprised I'm recognized," I replied, my voice smooth and low, ignoring the sting of his words. "I've been quite busy lately." Elias tightened his grip on my shoulder, physically attempting to assert his dominance. "Yes. Well, we all have busy schedules. I'm happy to see you trying to move past your difficulties. But remember your station, son. A failure needs to be humble." He pulled me aside, guiding me toward a secluded corner near the massive floral arrangement. This was it. The familiar, shaming lecture, the public execution dressed up as a private, fatherly concern. "You need to leave, Nicholas," he hissed, his face hardening as we moved out of earshot. "You are embarrassing me. This is not your level. Apex failed. Your wife left you. You are a public stain. Go home and start over quietly, the way I told you to." Victoria watched us from across the room, her eyes darting nervously between Elias and me. She looked less like a concerned ex-wife and more like a shareholder watching a hostile takeover unfold. Elias was so focused on delivering his old, worn-out script that he missed the shift in my posture, the complete absence of the nervous deferral he was used to seeing. He was attacking the ghost of Nicholas, the boy who craved his approval. "You are absolutely right, father," I said, my voice steady, my gaze locked on his. Apex Solutions failed. It was a disaster. It was a failure of vision, a failure of execution, and an absolute humiliation. I learned a great deal from it. He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Finally, some humility." I took a deep breath, the adrenaline beginning to surge, not as panic, but as electric focus. "But you are also wrong. I did not come here to be humble, and I did not come here to leave. I came here to acknowledge the failure of Apex, because that failure was the last thing I needed to escape your shadow." Elias's smile faltered, replaced by confusion. He opened his mouth to deliver another command, another lecture. He saw a chance to reclaim control, But I had come prepared to show him the true cost of his judgment. Elias saw a chance to reclaim control, but I had come prepared to show him the true cost of his judgment. His confusion had quickly given way to a dangerous, icy anger. He pulled me closer. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for the familiar signs of weakness or panic. He found none. The Nicholas he knew, the one who wilted under disapproval, was gone. "You're talking nonsense, Nicholas," he spat, keeping his voice carefully low, though the force behind it was chilling. "You're talking like one of your failed tech gurus. Apex is dead. You are disgraced. Do not make a scene here, or I swear, I will ruin what little reputation you have left." I met his gaze evenly. "You misunderstand, Father. I didn't come here to ask for your pity, or even your approval. I came here to acknowledge the total failure of Apex Solutions, which you find so deeply shameful." I paused, letting the silence emphasize my next words. "But I need you to understand that Apex was never meant to be the whole story. It was the necessary camouflage." He laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "Camouflage? For what? Your poor planning. Your incompetence." He took a step back, widening the distance between us, preparing to deliver the final, crushing blow, the one that always worked. He raised the voice, just enough to carry to the nearby onlookers, a group of powerful friends who were already watching with interest. The day my company went bankrupt, no one knew I had secretly built a new $100 billion empire. My father screamed, "You are a failure. Get out." Elias's voice rose, cutting through the ambient hum of the ballroom. He was playing to the audience now, framing himself as the stoic patriarch dealing with a delusional son. "You are a failure. Get out. Stop embarrassing yourself and me." The sheer force of his lifelong condemnation, magnified in the crowded, glittering space, was designed to send me spiraling back into my old patterns of self-doubt. But this time, the words felt hollow, mere noise confirming his predictable lack of faith. Suddenly, Victoria, who had been anxiously tracking the interaction, rushed over. She placed a possessive hand on Elias's arm, her eyes wide with frantic urgency. She whispered loudly, "Nick, please. Don't do this. You need to be quiet. Just go home." Then she turned to me, and using a voice laced with pure spite, she delivered her final, cruel dismissal. Aiming for my deepest insecurity, she leaned close, making sure her words were heard only by me. Your wife spat in your face and ran off with her lover. You are too soft to ever succeed. You were built to break." Her verbal venom was an attempt to dismantle me. She looked ready to finish the job she had started weeks ago. I maintained absolute stillness. The pain was there, a dull ache of acknowledgement, but is overshadowed by the exhilarating realization that they had both just offered me the perfect launch sequence. They had given me the stage and the final, necessary trigger. I interrupted Victoria, my voice quiet, cutting through the space with absolute, impossible authority. I was about to speak, and what came next broke them. My voice was not a shout, but a clean, firm command that forced them both to halt. I looked directly at Elias, my eyes holding his terrified, furious gaze. "You believe that Apex's failure defined me," I stated calmly, gesturing to the surrounding pillars and chandeliers. "You believe that my worth is measured by my ability to avoid your shame. But you're wrong. The failure of Apex was simply the shield that allowed me to build my real company, shielded from your judgment and your interference." Elias recoiled slightly, confusion warring with anger. "What are you talking about?" "What company?" "I'm talking about Phoenix Corporation. I announced, allowing a single, cold beat of silence to hang in the air. I looked out, briefly meeting the eyes of the stunned crowd that had gathered around us, drawn by Elias's earlier shouts. The same Phoenix Corporation that, as of this morning, finalized its acquisition of Omni Data and is valued at $100 billion. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The mask of contempt shattered on Elias's face. It was replaced by a profound, sickly gray confusion, followed by disbelief, and finally, unadulterated horror. $100 billion. The number was massive enough to be universally recognized even here. It was beyond his control, beyond his scope of influence. He had spent weeks declaring my ruin to his peers, only for me to step forward and reveal myself as a financial titan of a scale he could only dream of controlling. Victoria's reaction was more visceral. Her face, moments ago composed in spiteful confidence, crumpled. She went pale, her emerald gown, suddenly seeming cheap against the scale of the fortune she had willfully discarded. Slept. She had left the founder of a $100 billion empire for a mediocre corporate lawyer. The magnitude of her catastrophic error was broadcast across her features in real time. Her attempt at cruelty had cost her everything. Elias tried to speak, but only a strangled noise escaped his throat. That's impossible. You are Nicholas Hale, the owner of Apex. That company is registered offshore. It's a sham. It is registered offshore, yes. I confirmed, pulling a slim black, encrypted drive from the inside pocket of my tuxedo jacket. It was founded 6 years ago, after our last public argument about my autonomy. And it is entirely registered in my name, with no ties to the family or your legacy. Apex was the disposable distraction. Phoenix is the empire. I handed the drive to the nearest investment banker, a man I knew Elias respected deeply. I suggest you read the public filings. Mr. Stevenson, you will find that Phoenix Corporation is the core sponsor of this very gala. I am here as an honored guest, not a trespasser. The crowd began to buzz, a murmur of shock and disbelief rippling through the ballroom. Elias was visibly shaking. His composure fractured into 1,000 pieces. You played a double game. He finally managed, the accusation tasting like ash in his mouth. You allowed your family to believe you were ruined. You planned this disgrace. I played the game you taught me, father. I retorted, my voice ringing with a cold, final clarity. You taught me that my worth was conditional. You taught me that you would actively disown me the moment I showed weakness. Apex was designed to fail, because I needed an excuse for you to cut me loose. You always believed that you could control me through shame. You had to believe I was a failure, so you could stay comfortable in your own fragile success. Victoria suddenly let out a small, wounded sound, staggering slightly. She realized the scale of the money, the status, the security she had casually spat away, and the betrayal was aimed not just at me, but at her own pursuit of wealth. Elias stared at the drive still clutched in the banker's hand, his expression cycling through greed, terror, and finally, a devastating personal defeat. His life's judgment of me, the central pillar of his own self-importance, had been proven catastrophically wrong. The failure he condemned me for was the brilliant success he desperately envied. I had won the financial war, but the greatest victory was watching the immediate, total dissolution of their delusion. The sound of their shattered delusion was the sweetest silence I had ever known. The sound of their shattered delusion was the sweetest silence I had ever known. Elias stood frozen, his face slack. The gold standard of his self-importance suddenly revealed as fool's gold. Victoria swayed, leaning heavily on a nearby pedestal displaying a small, ornate award she no longer cared about. The banker, Mr. Stevenson, cleared his throat awkwardly, adjusting his body as he nervously clutched the drive containing the Phoenix filings. The crowd around us had swelled, hushed and electric, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I used the silence to act. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a second, thicker envelope, sealed with my personal mark. I walked the 2 steps separating Elias and me, and placed the envelope directly into his hands. His fingers closed around it weakly. "Open it, Father," I instructed, my voice maintaining its quiet, final command. He fumbled with the flap, his hands shaking noticeably. Inside were the documents detailing his own history of unethical, ruinous takeovers from years past. The files revealed the calculated cruelty he had employed to achieve his own success. The same practices he had always condemned me for allegedly engaging in. "These are copies of your own historical filings," I explained. "They show that your condemnation of my methods was rooted in hypocrisy, not principle. You weren't angry that I failed. You were furious that I had a life you couldn't control." Elias's eyes scanned the documents, his face morphing from shock to a desperate, wounded glare. He crumpled the papers, trying to hide the proof. "This is slander. Lies constructed by a petty child." "It's the truth, Elias," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. "The truth you taught me to hide from you. I am not seeking your approval, or your acceptance, or even your forgiveness. I am simply removing you from my life, permanently." I took a breath, allowing myself to feel the profound sorrow and the cold satisfaction of the moment. I had waited 32 years for this moment of absolute, unquestionable autonomy. I was about to speak, and what came next broke them. I stated clearly, concluding the truth I had started earlier. The failure was not apex. The failure was your inability to offer conditional love. You created the man who had to become $100 billion ghost just to be free. I looked pointedly at Victoria, who was staring at me with tearful, naked despair. You threw away genuine commitment for an illusion of security. Neither of you have any legal claim on Phoenix, or on me. The debt is settled. I turned, leaving them standing in the center of the glittering ballroom. Monuments to their own greed and misplaced judgment. I did not walk out quickly or run. I walked at a measured pace, head high, the gaze of hundreds of the city's elite following me. I wasn't trying to make a statement of rage. I was making a statement of finality. I was not seeking revenge. I was simply achieving total, irreversible separation. The weight of his judgment, which I had carried since childhood, had finally lifted. I felt lighter, ready to build a life based on something other than fear and secrecy. The only thing left to do was leave the stage entirely. I walked out of that gala, not just richer but lighter, realizing the fortress of success was meaningless without a foundation of truth. I bypassed my driver and walked several blocks in the cool night air, letting the silence of the city wash over me. Marcus caught up a few minutes later, pulling his sedan to the curb. He stepped out, his expression serious but tinged with relief. That was definitive, Nicholas. A masterclass in strategic confrontation. It was necessary, I replied, getting into the car. I don't need his acceptance anymore, Marcus. I just needed him to know why I left. Who knows? Marcus assured me. Hay and Victoria were both seen leaving separately, utterly ruined. The industry is already buzzing. Phoenix Corporation is officially the ghost that took over the banquet. We drove back to the Phoenix headquarters. Inside the silent, secure lounge, I finally allowed myself to relax fully. The fear that had fueled me for years was gone. I had spent so long believing that my vulnerability was the point of failure. But tonight, my courage to be honest had been the ultimate source of strength. I won't hide anymore, I told Marcus, looking at the city lights stretched out beneath us. I'm done with the camouflage. It's time to allow myself to be celebrated for the real work and for the courage to finally tell the truth. My emotional arc was complete. I no longer feared the judgment that came with visibility. I welcomed the honesty that came with vulnerability. The $100 billion empire was secure, but the real foundation was the self-acceptance I had finally achieved. I was ready to build a life based on genuine connection, not contingency plans. The exile was over. I was finally home.